Okay, just for Parents Weekend, it turns out that one of the reasons that we're having the midterm on Monday the 5th is that I'm getting a total hip replacement on Monday the 5th. And so for Parents Weekend, if people have, parents will put in requests for people to see, and so I will show up as unavailable. But I will be in my office. And I've already set up a phone connection with one of the students, so with their parents. So the bottom line is that if they've been to Parents Weekend, normally they only have a few minutes to get from this person over here. But if they have a break or something like that, I will be in my office. It's easier for me to sit there, and also it's with the hip replacements, they care about infection and that kind of stuff. So I'm going to be just in my office, but Kohama Barber, who works for the provost's office, said that she will send me, if anybody requests me to see me, she'll send me their information and I'll connect up with that. So just wanted to let you know that that's the reason that I won't be available for Parents Weekend, but I'll try to connect up with any parent that was interested, and we'll figure out a way to make that happen. All right. Any questions on that? All right. All right. Band pick of the week this week is Jamestown Revival. Anybody heard of Jamestown Revival? Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. They're a duo, two guys that went to grammar school, high school together. They're out of Texas. They've been around for a bit. Their genre is sort of country rock, southern rock, that sort of genre. And so you might want to just take a listen to them. Get on Spotify or whatever. And they've been around. I think they started in 2011, but they've been at Coachella, and I believe that they've been on Austin City Limits. So just to give you an idea that they're worth listening to. All right. Okay. So last time we were talking about the foundations of liberalism. When Mises was saying that anti-liberal thought was going to cause all these problems, and that he says, okay, what's going to solve these problems is for us to reintroduce classical liberalism, and then lays out what he means by that. And we said that classical liberals, the foundations of that are, one is private property rights, freedom, and the third thing we talked about was peace. And so, and for every foundation that's in there, there's a reason for that's in there, because it's necessary for market capitalism to work, right? So the logic of his argument is, I want to create wealth for the masses. There's only one way to do that, and that's market capitalism. And so what political philosophy is consistent with that? And then what we're going to develop, so what the role of government would be then. What is the purpose and role of government? A fourth foundation is equality. And what he means by that is equality under the law. Not equality of income, because inequality of income is going to be one of the foundations as well, but equality under the law. That means that I'm not going to be treated differently than you are. It's really equality of our our political and civil rights. And why would that be? Well, you know, if you think that you're being treated the same as everybody else in terms of the law, what are you going to end up with? Well, you'll more likely end up with social harmony, right? If what happens is you think that your particular group or you as an individual are being treated unequally in terms of what the law says, then what do you get? You get revolution, right? I mean, that's what, if you look at, you know, what goes on where you have in Iraq or Iran, where you may have conflicts, conflicts within different groups that feel that the government is not treating them equally with other people. And so what's your solution if you know, you don't get social harmony when you have groups that feel that they're being being discriminated against in some sense, okay? You know, if the recent issues that are coming up in terms of equality under the law, but again, social harmony requires that people feel that they're being treated equally to others. But you have equality under the law, but a fifth foundation is inequality of income. You want inequality of income. Right? It's interesting to just look at the political debate today about inequality of income, right? As if it's a bad thing. There's some discussion about if one of the candidates wins, there would be a large income tax increase in the income tax rate on people over so much, like $1 million a year or something like that, right? So why are you doing that? If you're doing that because you think that wealthy people are just too wealthy and we'd like to have we'd like to reduce the inequality of income because it's somehow inequality of income is a bad thing, then that would be something that would not be consistent with what Mises is talking about here. And why does he want inequality, or why do classical liberals require inequality of income? It's because that basically our institutional arrangement affects the institutional arrangement affects the wealth of society. That is, you know, his point is that if people are rewarded for producing stuff that other people want, if people are rewarded for innovating, then we're all going to be wealthier. You know, we've emphasized that, you know, you're wealthier than the richest person in the world 100 years ago, okay? Why is that? Because of the innovation that's happened. You have access to all the, you know, why is the United States so wealthy relative to the Democratic Republic of Congo, right? This was that you don't have to live like a refugee, right? Well, you guys don't have to live like refugees because you're in a system that allows you to create wealth, right? And everybody's wealthier here. And why is that? Because this inequality of income is the mechanism by which you have incentives to be productive. And so this inequality of income is a good thing. Now, again, it's difficult to explain that to people if all they're doing is looking at it emotionally, right? We're talking about that you need to use logic to discuss how this works and debate the issues on the merits. And so, again, why does this class have essay questions? Because it allows you, but it makes it so that you are learning to be able to explain to other people why inequality of income is a good thing. If you just say inequality of income is a good thing, they'll say, oh, that's just because you're rich and you have privilege, and that's why you're for it, right? So you have to be able to explain, no, that the reason inequality of income is a good thing is because it creates incentives for you to produce things that other people want and are willing to pay the opportunity cost of the resources, and to create innovation, and leads to us all being wealthier. The next part is private property, what he calls private property and ethics. Private property and ethics. And what he means by this is that you need to respect property rights of others. Now, we started out saying that private property is important because private property allows for this division of labor, etc. Okay? But it's not just that we have private property rights, but that everybody thinks this is a good idea, right? That people believe in the private property rights. For example, he says that what is moral is everything that serves to preserve the social order, right? Private property is necessary for the market process to work, and so we need to respect the private property of others. If we don't, if you just have the law that creates property rights, but we don't go along with it, then what's going to happen? It's going to be way too expensive to enforce the property rights, okay? I mean, think about, you guys walk into Walmart, right? You could easily, I mean, especially today, where you do your own checkout, right? I mean, aren't you sort of amazed at how the heck Kroger's or anybody else can have where you self-check out? Like you couldn't throw in a candy bar without the machine that's talking to you notice. Oh, you did not put your candy bar, you didn't scan your candy bar. No, it just says, scan the next object, right? And so if you guys didn't respect property rights, the whole, the thing wouldn't work. You'd have to have, well, in fact, when I was at Berkeley, we used to shop at a place that was, my roommate and I, at a place in Oakland. And Oakland at the time was a high-risk area, so maybe put it that way. And they had armed guards at the grocery store when I was there, right? Why was that? They didn't have armed guards at the grocery stores at Berkeley because people respected the property rights. But they had to have them in Oakland because people didn't. And so imagine, all the ways that you could, steal stuff. I mean, you guys leave all your, bags and, things when you go into the cafeteria, right? I mean, there's just, anybody could just walk up and take your stuff, right? But they don't generally. So, what's going on here is that what he's saying is that classical liberals not only believe that the government should establish property rights, but that everybody should believe in property rights and respect the property rights of others. That's why he calls it private property and ethics. Yes?
So the government creates the property rights, but it's the people who respect it that makes it
That's correct. The government creates property rights. In fact, in the law and economics class, we spend a good deal of time talking about that. So the government establishes, here's the property rights. But if you guys don't morally believe in it, then the system just isn't going to work. And it's just going to be too expensive to make it function unless you guys believe in it. The next section is, or the next foundation is that you have a government, right? We call it the state and the government. His point here is that, and he emphasizes, liberals are not anarchists. Okay? Now, if you were to read Murray Rothbard's For a New Liberty, I mean, there are folks that are anarchists, and they think we'd be better off with no government at all. And in For a New Liberty, he has a long discussion about how things could function without a government. Fairly clever ways of, figuring how this might work, but that's not what a classical liberal believes in, right? Classical liberal believes that there ought to be government. And in fact, he says, why is that? Because it's necessary to protect the property rights, okay? Right, a government's necessary to protect property rights. Because there's going to be some people who don't respect property rights, right? There's going to be some people who steal stuff. If you go to the south side of Chicago, if you're from that area, you'll notice that there's a number of people that don't respect the property rights of others, okay? And so what do you need? You need government to be able to protect those property rights. So the point is that that you have to, that classical liberals don't say there shouldn't be any government at all, but the government's got a purpose, and that purpose is to protect property rights. Yes?
Does liberalism have a stance on whether or why the government would be better at doing that than a private entity?
Yes. Basically, they don't think that just private entities would be capable of doing it, that there's too many people that are not respecting the property rights. If everybody respected the property rights, then we wouldn't need government, okay? Because no one's going to attack us, right? If you think that even if you think there's going to be some other country that's attacking you, then you're going to need could we have, private armies? But there's a lot of problems with what's called, the public good characteristics of that. So, but his point here is that government is more likely to be able to protect your property rights than just relying on people volunteering to do that. Because if you had private armies, who's going to pay for the private army? Right? And how am I going to get you to pay for it? Because we're not going to exclude, your house if the Canadians attack us. We're somehow going to make it so that, your house doesn't get protected and we protect everybody else's. Right? But he says that it necessarily means limited government, right? That it's limited. It's limited to the protection of property rights. That's what your government is there. It's limited to the protection of life, liberty, and property. That's what classical liberals believe in. The next foundation is democracy. Classical liberals believe in democracy. And yes?
By democracy, do you mean a strict democracy, or would a democratic republic or constitutional republic also kind of fall under that category?
That would all fall under it. What he's talking about here is that you have, however you structure it particularly, that it is consent of the governed. Right? That's what he's talking about here, is that he says in reality that we're, no matter how you set this thing up, in reality you're governed by a handful of people. Okay? You folks may know the you folks, may know who the Secretary of Defense is, or you may know the Secretary of Education, or you might know the Secretary of Health and Human Services, okay? But probably you don't. We may know Betsy DeVos. I mean, some of us know Betsy DeVos, but that's an unusual feature, that you actually know who the people that are running the cabinets are, and they're not even probably governing you, right? But I mean, it's all the little bureaucrats that are out there are making decisions about whether you can, like if you want to have you want to put drain tile in your on your farmland. The question is, is this going to interfere with the navigable waters of the United States? If so, then you can't do that, right? But the Secretary of Agriculture is not going to be there looking at it. There's going to be somebody working for the Department of Agriculture that's going to be doing it. So Mises' point is that the reality is that we're under a system where we're governed by the bureaucrats, and he says that a social peace requires consent of the governed. That's what this is about. So we're looking at social peace, and what does that mean? We want to have consent of the governed. And if you don't have consent of the governed, then you're going to have revolution, right? In fact, in the Econ 105 folder, I just placed a book called, a PDF version of a book called The Politics of Obedience. And The Politics of Obedience was written by de Wattier in 1577. And he's talking about monarchies. He says, well, how is it that we've got these monarchies, and you're just one person, you're the king. How is it that you can stay in power? I mean, why don't people just like assassinate their kings all the time, right? And he says that in the book, he basically says that the reason that the monarchy can stay in power is that at least a significant portion of the population thinks what they're doing is okay. You get assassinations and things like that when people are irritated with how it's going. But how can one person have this authoritarian structure and stay in business? Anyway, it's interesting to read the book. It's not very long. That he was looking in 1577 and saying, hey, there's probably some underlying consent of the governed out there. And what Mises argues is the same thing. He says that no government can maintain power without a majority of the folks believing in it. So what do you need? You need to have a peaceful way to change government. You need to have a peaceful way to change the government, and basically voting, you as individuals being able to vote on who your next president is or who your state representative is or that kind of stuff. You guys believe in the system, okay? And it's a much cheaper way to change governments than to have a revolution. Revolutions are expensive, right? You got using up all resources, blowing stuff up and the like. So that Mises's point here is that you have to win over the minds of the people to stay in power. And so democracy is the cheaper way to change governments once people have decided they're not happy with the government. That's a much cheaper way to do it than to have a revolution. And then he really talks about that in the absence of democracy, then force will be used, and that will lead us back to the Middle Ages. And of course, what Hayek's book is called The Road to Serfdom. Again, a very short, really good book. We'll talk more a little bit about it later on. But The Road to Serfdom, Hayek wrote at the end of World War II, talking essentially about this similar idea that when the government is centrally planning, can lead us down this road to serfdom. But anyway, Mises here is talking about force will be used if you don't have democracy. This is also in the section I quoted earlier about where he says that the fascists are going to start World War II. It is in this section here that he talks about that, where he says that because their foreign policy is built on force, it's going to lead to all sorts of endless series of wars. Right? The next foundation is the idea of limits on the government activity. He's going to explain later on why socialism can't produce wealth for the masses. But here he's talking about, you know what? He says, and remember this is during Prohibition, right? 1927. He's talking, this is Prohibition. And what does he say? He says that the purpose of government is solely to guarantee the protection of life, liberty, and property, and private property against violent attacks. Okay? The purpose of government is to protect life, liberty, and property. And he includes against violent attacks. So that's what government is about. Then he says, once you grant the government the ability to prohibit other things, right? Once you go and you say, what are you going to do? He says that we're going to result in unintended consequences. If the government goes beyond this, right? We're going to have, if a government goes beyond, it creates unintended consequences and leads to further government intervention. And we get this cycle going on. But he also talks about what happens if you say the government can keep you from consuming or buying something. Okay? He says that, what are you doing? You're protecting us from our own action, right? If the government is saying, you guys don't know that you shouldn't be drinking alcohol, that it's bad for you, I'm going to protect you against actions by yourself by making a law that says you can't do that, right? So he says, here's the problem. Once government can be used to protect you against your own action, what's the problem? There's no limit, right? There's no limit on what your government can do. In fact, he says that when, and he's basically right, during Prohibition, right, where we had a constitutional amendment to say that you can't use alcohol, you can't sell alcohol, right? Only amendment that's been repealed, right? Pretty big deal to repeal a constitutional amendment. So it clearly wasn't working very well, right? But in 1927, they didn't know that it wasn't going to work very well, right? And what does he say? He says that it's sort of interesting if you look in this section. He'll say, if you allow it for alcohol, why would you think that it wouldn't be used for cocaine and other substances, right? And so that's exactly what started to happen, right? That if you look at, take a look at that section, and you'll see that he's saying, once you grant this authority, it says you can't use alcohol because you were, you guys are out there drinking alcohol, you wouldn't know it. What about morphine, right? Which, and in, even as late as the 1960s, LSD was legal in the United States. So the, he says basically the government's just going to keep going on, and he has a quote where he says, a free man must be able to endure it when his fellow men act and live otherwise than he considers proper. Okay? I mean, he doesn't say if you have to accept it, right? If you think that drinking alcohol is bad, he doesn't say, oh, you shouldn't go around and tell people that they shouldn't drink alcohol. In fact, that's what you should do, right? You should persuade them that they shouldn't be drinking alcohol. You just can't use the government to do it, right? That's the issue. Once you grant the government the authority to tell people they can't use this because it's bad for them, where does it end? Now, that's different than saying, I can't produce something that kills people and I don't tell them, right? Okay? Now, what you've done, they would not have bought that product if they had known that it was going to kill them or addict them or whatever. Okay? So, so you can't commit fraud in some sense, but you can't have the government just saying, this is bad for you guys, and so I'm not going to allow you to do it because you're just making the wrong decisions. Yeah.
So he makes kind of a distinction between like legality and legitimacy in different actions like alcohol and drugs and whatnot. But would you say that as the government has progressed in this, I don't know, bureaucratic almost overreach of different, prohibitions of different things, do you think now legality holds more sway of legitimacy, if that makes sense, culturally? Well,
this is an important point because there's basically all three of our the authors are going to be reading are talking about the difference between something being legal and something being legitimate. Okay, Bastiat in particular has a discussion about what's legal and what's legitimate, and then as does Hayek. But Mises is indicating that as well. That is, there are going to be things that you think are improper for people to do. This is illegitimate, right? But you can't use the government to make it illegal. You can persuade other people, but once you allow the government to say, oh, which is the bureaucrats, to say, hey, this is, we're not going to allow this, there's no end to that.
How do you backtrack it then?
How do you backtrack it? Well, you backtrack it the same way that Mises was saying, hey, we're moving towards all these problems. You need to be able to persuade people to become classical liberals and be able to explain to them, yeah, cocaine is bad for people to have, right? And we should be able to explain to people why it's bad. Now, if as long as they are not, there's not fraud going on where the manufacturer of cocaine is not telling you here's what the problems with cocaine are. As long as they're not doing that, then if you knowingly decide to do that, then Mises is going to say, hey, that's not the role of government to step in. But it's my role to go and to explain to people why they shouldn't do that. Right? So you're taking on, you have to be able to persuade people. Yeah.
So with this idea, where's the line between like the government protecting you from yourself and the government protecting others from you? So say like secondhand smoking in public areas, or say wearing a mask in public.
Yes, and that's what we call in public choice and public finance and law and economics an externality. Right. That is, your use of a property affects my use of the property. So should you be able to allow your house to deteriorate when it's next to mine, and you create blight, and that's causing a problem? So it would be proper for the role of the government to have a law that says you have to keep your property up, right? Or we don't allow people to use unleaded gas anymore. Okay, unleaded gas or leaded gas, don't allow them. Excuse me, they don't allow them to use the leaded gas. Yet, you'll notice that gasoline now is all unleaded. Okay, but if this were 1970, most of the gasoline would have lead in it. And why is that? Because I'm going to use that because it improves the gas mileage by quite a bit. But it also sends lead out into the atmosphere, so when I'm driving by your house, that lead is floating around. So that is, again, what we call an externality. Your use of the property is affecting my use of the property. And so you have laws that would deal with that. Again, we can go in there's a thing called the Coase theorem and all sorts of things that go on about this, and how the government should deal with these externalities. But that is a protection of property rights. That would fall within this protection of property rights. Yes.
So it's kind of like the difference between, it's not against the law to become intoxicated, but it's against the law if you hurt someone or drunk driving or something like that. So it's not what you choose to do with it necessarily, but it's more if you harm someone else's property.
That's exactly right. She was saying that it's not, you can make it not against the law to become drunk, but it's against the law if you were to drive drunk and crash into somebody and harm them. So then that you could have against the law. Public drunkenness, I suppose, I don't know where that sort of ends, where you're running around making all sorts of noise. It depends on what you do. If you're publicly drunk but you're not interfering with my picnic or something like that, then that's okay. I mean, we have all sorts of things like that, noise ordinances and things like that. But the real issue is, are you violating my property rights somehow? And if you're not, then you can do what you want. And even if these things are bad, you want to make it so that that you're persuading people, because again, his point is, where does it stop, right? He's got this quote in here that basically says, if you do this for alcohol, when you also do it for morphine and cocaine and all this other stuff that was legal in 1927, and of course that's, it fell under that category. All right, So, again, he says, a free man must be able to endure it when his fellow men act and live otherwise than he considers proper. But, again, that doesn't mean you shouldn't try to persuade them. You just can't use the government to keep them from doing it, because you'll have set up this you'll have set up this no limit to what your government's going to do. The next thing that classical liberalism believes in is tolerance. And in particular, he's talking about tolerance of religion. And of course, we have that in the United States Constitution, right? Congress shall enact no law regarding the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, right? Why is that there? Again, social harmony. If the government said you can't be Roman Catholic, okay? If the government would do that, then what would happen? Then people who are Roman Catholics would get upset, and you wouldn't have social harmony, right? Or if you say you cannot be you can't be a Muslim, okay? If you can't, then what would happen? Well, then there would not be social harmony. So his point here is classical liberals believe that you got to have tolerance of religion. And again, why? Because you want to have social harmony. And this is something that people really believe in. And if something people really believe in that, and you keep so that they can't do this, what they really believe in, then you're going to create problems. And then last, he calls that state and antisocial conduct. State and antisocial conduct. And what he's talking about here is that he says all state activity is really human action, what we were just talking about. All state action is human action. You will not have, as I was just mentioning, if you're trying to put drain tile in, it's not that the Department of Agriculture is going to determine whether you can put drain tile in. There's going to be some individual bureaucrat that's going to determine whether you can put the drain tile in, right? And that, he says, the goal of the state is the preservation of society. And he says the anomaly is that you have to have some state, right, to protect the property rights. You have to have some government. But then oftentimes our progress has been made in doing things that are resistance to the state. He says that the law has to create what he calls a sphere, and what Hayek has is that the law has to create a sphere of free action. What is the law to do? And again, when we read Hayek's Constitution of Liberty, it'll go into that in much more detail. But that what is the law's got to make it so that you can act according to your own plan as long as you're within the law. The law is creating a boundary. It says that you can't steal my stuff, okay? But within the bounds of the law, you're free to do whatever you want to do, okay? So how does it work? The police can't just come into your house without a warrant, right? I mean, generally that's the case, okay? I mean, there's some exceptions, if they're in pursuit of a criminal or they think criminal activity is going on, they have evidence that criminal activity is going on there, then they might be able to come in without a warrant. But generally, that's your property, right? They can't just search your car without evidence that there's some criminal activity going within your car, right? That's your property. So the idea is that you have to realize that any state action is giving coercive power of one individual over another, right? It's really some human action, they're going to get coercive power. We're going to give coercive power of some individual over another individual. And again, classical liberals are aware of this, and that the focus that the goal of the state is to preserve society, and in particular to preserve a market-based society. And that's and so what should be happening? Our government should be, again, when we read Constitutional Liberty, we're going to talk more about this, but Hayek talks about how what you ought to do is create the laws so that it gives you the largest boundary of free action, so that we want to encourage individual liberty, and so the legal structure should be such that it expands what that free action is. Again, this issue here is that capitalism is the system that he's trying to preserve with this classical liberalism. So why are all these things included? Any of these foundations are there because it'll make market capitalism work, and with the absence of them, market capitalism isn't going to work very well. And he talks about again in the closing of this thing that if you try to well, first of all, that if you look at private ownership of property, that's where you get economic advancement. Historically, if you look at historically, once you get private ownership, that's when you start to get economic advancement. And redistribution is going to change the incentives and make it so that we will get less economic activity, right? That's what when he was talking about inequality of income is a good thing, right? That redistribution reduces the incentive for innovation. And production. Suppose that you were Ford Motor Company and you were thinking about putting in a plant, and what happens is the government just says, no, we're taking that plant over, right? The government could any time come in and just take that plant over. Well, if that's the case, why would you ever build the plant in the first place, right? Because you're not assured of your property rights. And there are countries where the government did that, like Venezuela, okay? And once it did that, guess what? Ford Motor Company's not building a plant in Venezuela anytime soon, okay? And so what is that going to do? It's going to reduce the economic activity, and it's going to reduce the wealth of everybody once you do that. And what he says is that socialism is the ownership of, we talked about this before, where socialism is where the government owns everything. And he has a little, next section is, what he calls interventionism. And interventionism is sort of in between. That is, the government doesn't own everything, but the government can come in and tell you, oh, here's what you can do with your property, here's what you can't do with your property, here's what you have to do with your property. And so interventionism, he's going to argue, will eventually just lead to socialism in the end. All right, so for next time we will, we're pretty well going to get into the next chapter. We're not going to do economic, liberal foreign policy. That we're not going to do that chapter. Okay. So the next thing we'll probably be looking at is liberal economic policy. Once we're almost done with that chapter on the foundations. So we'll move into the next liberal economic policy. All right.